hear from Tim.
Well, you said at the start of your talk, towards the beginning of it, I think I'm quoting you right, that revenge was the most generous current response to the current situation. And if you would just unpack that.
Yeah, I didn't say current. I'm not sure what I believe about that. I was quoting Walter Benjamin, who said that the era of social democracy vis-a-vis Nazism was to decry motivations like revenge as being not right. That seems to me a picture of current politics. So it reminds me of the line in one of Sean's poems in Happiness, Sean Bonney's poems, where if you see a Tory in the street, cut his throat, it will bring out the best in you. So I mean, the main point of that I'm not going to talk about, but there is a point about generosity there. Some kind of claim about generosity. So that's where I'm coming from. Does that make sense? In other words, if the current political consensus, including everything that's on the election list that I've seen anyway, is that, you know, revenge, no, you know, that kind of thing, no, you know, just you know. So that seems to be kind of important, given that probably the action of George Osborne could be quite accurately categorized as revenge upon those who prevented the, let's say, right-wing dream elaborated in 1944 by Hayek and others, preventing it coming about by being Labourites, Social Democrats, and workers. But you know, being that's where I'm back to you.
I have another question for Will. Thanks very much for that very thought-provoking talk this morning, especially at the first opening talk. I just was a bit curious about the use of the idea of hysteria, especially talking about the contrast you set up between Verity Spot and Jeff Hilson. Partially, to me, it seems that the Death List and Verity Spot and other work in that more kind of explicit political manner, such as the quotation from Sean Bonney's work you just mentioned about cutting a Tory's throat, that seems to be just kind of really a kind of inversion or a striking back at the standard order. And it doesn't strike me as having the same kind of level of complexity. Whereas, as for example, in Jeff Hilson's piece, you don't have an explicit politics at all. And it's very different because it's not just kind of reacting to the situation by overturning it, trying to overturn it, or presenting a kind of violent response in some ways. It seems to me a very, very different thing. And what strikes me is that I'm thinking of hysteria here. Sorry, this is a bit involved. But hysteria in terms set up not so much in the Freudian scheme, but the later French psychoanalytic scheme, Lacan, etc., in which hysteria is the refusal to respond to the interpellative call of the master's discourse. And the hysteric in this mode has one leg or one foot in the kind of belief in the power of the master's discourse, and one that will not enter into that. And that to me seems to be much more kind of what Hilson is doing in a way, that there's a kind of acceptance because there's no explicit political pull. There's no explicit political take. And yet it's also got another leg in a complete refusal. Whereas the other poems, Verity Spot specifically, it's much more part of the master's discourse, if you will, because it's just using the master's terms and turning them over. And I think all the kind of, experimental so-called language fragments, etc., isn't really challenging language, because we already have, 50 years or more of history of those kind of interventions in language, and they're now a kind of solidified arsenal, which is part of the larger. Sorry. So the question really is not really a question. It has to do with you were talking about the difficulty of moving between and among these different poets in a way, and there is some difficulty moving them. But I wondered why you see that such a difficult thing to move between, and why you set up these kind of distinctions between them in this way.
Well, obviously, I moved, set up, as you say, to move from Verity Spot to Jeff Hilson is a kind of question, and also, okay, so it's a terrain you've attempted to, you had traversed and now attempted to traverse, and I think it's an incredibly important terrain. And I wouldn't use the word explicit. Explicit political as actually the way to handle this. I think explicit, what you call explicit statements,
Yeah.
in terms of the let's say gesture or theatrical, to use Jessica and Missy Benning's work, can be very complex. So that the complexity you're invoking in Jeff's work, and that I think is a very interesting complexity. I would say it's there in other terms in Verity Spot's work. So what is that complexity? Okay, it's that thing to do with violence and revenge. It seems to me extremely complex. Not in the terms of an analytic complex, but what it means to make a statement in a given language situation, and to make that statement and then discover that actually you've shut the door on love by making it. But then, so all regimes were based on a suspension of the law at some point. And we've inherited a particular suspension that finds itself. Therefore, I'm not happy with this idea of the master's discourse not being there in Jeff's work, or at least it's there in a more subtle way, you're saying, than in Verity. I'm not very happy with that. It seems to me that there might be a problem with the very idea of the master's discourse. I was calling it the law, and in Lacan's universe, there doesn't seem to be a possibility of necessary suspension of the law, except in Seminar 20 in some kind of way or in the stuff on Antigone. But for me, suspension of the law is, well, for me, I think it's necessary to think that. And if you suspend the law, then what happens to language? Given that in some complex way, what sustains the production of meaning in language does relate to law.
Certainly.
And if the law were suspended by some other type of regime in the UK, sure as hell, the way we spoke and so on would. And in some way it's been suspended by the Tory government, it seems to me, in some way. And so that's altered our relation to certain words. Sorry, I went on even longer than you, sorry. So it's a really interesting area.
Yeah. I don't know if we have time now to continue with, but I'd like to talk a bit more.
Yeah, I think we've probably got time for one more, and then we'll finish. We need to make up some time, I think.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you a question. No, I was thinking about some similar questions to those already discussed, but for me it was emerging in this idea of limits and what we might mean by those. And I think I'd like to ask Francis a question about that, really, because I still had the echo of the talk when I was reading that, and I was thinking about what what I was hearing was a sort of a movement across a lot of boundaries in your work between times, between positions, a really quite compellingly dramatic reading in some sense, and I haven't heard you read before, so thank you. But I wanted to think about that question of the anti-consensus. Is that something that would that connect in your work to perhaps the ideas that facing this from family that we were talking about earlier? Is that idea of different voices? If you think about the limits of language, are those limits internal in your work, or is that something you think about?
Well, I think, first of all, I think Will's talk did provide a really good framework for what I went on to do, because it does very much deal with limits, but they get really fuzzy and messy, and there isn't necessarily like the in and out almost become the same thing, because the tension between not just the times but all of the different wars, different battles, internal and external, it all kind of dissolves. It's kind of like it's been hit by boiling oil or acid or something like that, but has also created it at the same time, so it's spraying it back out. So I do definitely think about that, and I know that it keeps attention, and it has to be addressed, but I don't have answers for it. I think if I had the answers for what I've been trying to set up, then I would be putting those limits in there if there were specific answers, and if there are specific answers, then you've got the law, I suppose, becomes put into place wherever you put those boundaries, I suppose.
Okay, thanks. I think we really have to finish now. We'll reconvene here in about 20 minutes. But for now, thanks to Francis and William for